Ooh, that looks tasty.
Gamer is back with another crowdfunding preview, and today we're talking about Formosa Tea, designed by Cao Chu Lan with art by Samixes. And I do apologize for mispronouncing those names. Now, before I get started, please make sure you turn your Klingon subtitles, because if I make any mistakes in the rules overview, that's where you'll find the corrections. Additionally, this is a prototype of what is going to be the reprint with some changes, so please just understand that everything you see here is still subject to change. And yes, what you're seeing here is paper taped over the board. Also, I need to point out that the version that I was sent is actually a German version, not an English version. So some of the rules I'm actually not sure of exactly how they work. And so I was going a little bit off the old game. So there's several things kind of in there that make things a little bit different than normal, but the core of the game and the core overview I'm going to give remains the same. And the publisher sent me this prototype, and they may or may not send me a final version if this game funds. Now, with that said, what this game is this is a game where you are making tea, and you are harvesting the tea, and you are drying the tea, and then you are selling the tea, either in the global market or domestically at home. And this is going to be done through a series of worker placement and kind of tableau building, which I will explain now. If you are not interested in how this game is played, and we'll jump into my final thoughts, then you will go to the timestamp on the screen right now. For those of us still here, let's talk about how this game is played. At its core, you need to know that you have two different types of workers. You have the tea farmers, which are only going to be able to go onto the left side of the board, and you have the tea masters, which can go anywhere, but usually they're going to wind up on the right side of the board. And so what's usually going to happen is you're going to be taking one of your tea farmers, usually, again, it doesn't have to be, and placing it on one of these spots in the tea plantations. And when you do that, whatever place you place them on, you can either take all of one color. For example, going here, I could take both of the browns, which is black tea, or you can take one of every color that is there. In this case, I could take one green and one brown. In other words, green tea and black tea. Or let's say I'd gone over here, I could take all three of the orange, which are oolong tea. Now, if you ever take all of them, then you also get to take this kind of tea blossom as well, which will be used later on. So I'll just go ahead and just grab that for now and grab these teas here. Now, the other thing that's going to happen, though, is based on what row you are in, it's also going to activate any tea masters over here. So let's just say another player had their tea master right here. Then they would get to move their tea master one space. And then they'd get to take the action that is right there, which is they could take a green tea at one wetness and move it into Flavor Town. I don't know what it's exactly called, but I'm going to call it Flavor Town. Or if they wanted, they could go all the way to the end. And this is where they're going to be able to kind of finalize the drying of their tea. And they're going to move as many spaces as there are workers in that column over here in the plantation. So if another player were to say, come right here, and we'll just say they take two of those, then that would allow the tea masters to move two. Because we have 1, 2, so they could move 1, 2, they could do this, and they could do this, or jump all the way to the end. Now, it's important to note that it doesn't matter what player places their worker over here in the plantation. All players that have tea masters over here in the same row will get to move, again, as many spaces as there are workers, or jump all the way to the end. And for the most part, what's happening in these spaces are you're going to be drying your tea. So let's talk about that. When you are harvesting tea, you'll be using this board right here. And if you look up here, this is telling you how dry the tea is at the beginning of the round. So when the tea was taken from here, it is a 2 wetness. So if that was these two, I'd put them right here in the 2 wetness basket. Whereas, let's say they came from over here, then the wetness is 1. And just for the sake of argument, I'm going to grab some different teas here and put those right there. And so that's my tea basket. And you're limited to 5 tea that you can have over here, and you're limited to 6 tea that you can have over here at any time before you have to do something with it. Now, the first time that you put a tea master into the factory, that's going to activate one type of tea. So if I go here, that's going to activate all of the black tea. If I go up here, that's going to activate all the oolong tea. This third spot that I have covered will activate all the green tea. And then the bottom has to do with flavored teas. And so let's just say that I happen to have a board that looks like this. I have a whole bunch of black tea ready to go. So I take my tea master and I place them there. All of that is going to move over into the black tea drying area. So this would move to here, 2 goes to 2, the 1s go to 1, and the 0 goes to 0, just like that. Then, right here, I have the -1 wetness. So I would take one of these and I could drop it down 1 level. So now this second cube of tea is completely dry. Or if I didn't want to do that, I could bring that down from the 2 to the 1, but we'll just say I did that and move on. Then as you move across, you're going to get different options of what you can do. So if I were to move here, I can move 1 tea from the 1 zone over to Flavor Town, and you'll notice that it is also now completely dry. When I come here, I can move a 2 wetness tea over here to Flavor Town, and now that is also completely dry. And then over here, twice I can move 2 cubes from the 0 over into Flavor Town, which is all well and good. The other thing that I should have pointed out is up here it tells you when you are moving tea from here, if you move 3 or 4 tea, you get to move up once on this chart here, which is going to advance you up the technology track, which when you get far enough over here is going to give you points based on the tea orders you fulfilled. But these things here are going to give you special bonuses that you're going to be able to slot in to your tea factory. So when you activate it for the first time, you'll be able to do that as well. Then when you get all the way to the end here, you'll be able to pick the worker back up. And that one is going to give you another action for the round, but it's also going to take all of this tea and move it over here to the finished product. In this case, all of my tea is completely dry and in Flavor Town. So that would be moved right here. And that means I have excellent tea. And since I moved at least 4, I would gain 6 points for that. So let's just say that this is what I had, which is a total wetness of 2. And I got all the way over, I would move it over, I'd add up all the wetness, which is 2, and then that would wind up going right here because I have wetness of under 3. And this is just normal tea. If I had a total wetness of 3 or more, it would all go right here because it's pretty much bad tea. And that's going to work exactly the same for all the different types of tea. Now, before I move on to talking about what you're going to be doing with the tea, it's important to note that you're going to play through a series of rounds based on the number of players, and once everybody has placed all of their workers on the board, that is going to be the end of the round. And if you wind up picking a worker back up, that's going to give you one more placement where that worker can be placed out yet again. And at the end of every round, there's going to be a different event which is based on the year, which might give you a different in-game scoring condition, it might give you an immediate bonus or something like that. And this is also going to be how you track the different rounds. Now the other 2 things you have on this board are down here, where you can wind up placing a worker down here and you're going to sell your tea at the domestic market. And if you sell 2 of the same type of tea, then you're going to move up 2 spaces on this track. And there's bonuses as you go up, and there's worth more points at the end of the game. If you sell 1 of each different type of tea, you're going to go up 3 spaces. And again, as I said, there's bonuses on this track as you go. And you'll get points that way, but most of your points you're going to get over here at the global market. And so as you place your workers out here, you're going to get to fulfill global market orders. And what you're going to have is you're going to have a series of order cards out on the board, and it's going to be a 4x3 grid that you have out. And I'll just place out 2 here. And what you have here is what you're trying to fulfill. It's very simple. In this case, all you need here is a single batch of oolong or orange tea. And that's going to give you one of these symbols for the end of the game, which is in-game scoring. And it'll give you a bonus right here, in this case, which is harvest another bit of tea from the plantation. But depending on the kind of tea that you use, that's going to give you variable points. If you use the really good tea, you'll get 2 points. If you use normal tea, you'll get 1 point. And if you use bad tea, you get a point, but you don't get to keep this card. As I said, that's useful for in-game scoring. And as you're going through the game, you'll see that you get to harder and harder orders to fulfill, as you can see right there, down to the most complex, which are like that, which would give you a whole bunch of symbols at the in-game scoring and a lot of points, but of course it's going to take you 4 T. And that's pretty much how this game works. So what do I like about this game? The first thing is I shockingly enjoy the theme behind it. I mean, I like tea. I drink buckets of iced tea, and I do enjoy hot tea. I think I like coffee more, but I do drink hot tea decently regularly. And so I actually kind of enjoyed everything behind it, and kind of the way you get to kind of learn in theory how tea used to be made. And along with it has all these little historical cards, and it kind of tells you in the rule book what the history behind these cards is. And I actually really enjoyed that. Also, as far as a Euro game goes, I think this game does a pretty good job of connecting gameplay to the theme. As you're kind of sending your tea masters along, they have to do these things. You have to dry the tea out. You have to add the flavorfulness to the teas. You have to do all of these things, and if you mess up a little bit, you mess up the batch. And to me, that makes sense, because if you have a chunk of wet tea in your dry tea, well, now all of it's a little bit wet. So all of that, I think it actually is very clever, and I think it actually works really well. I love this idea that you're selling the better stuff to the global market, and you're selling whatever you got left to the domestic market, which is both messed up and feels right. And I love that you're taking like the really crappy tea and then suddenly you're just going to make like flavored teas with it. So just kind of get it out there. I think all of it thematically just works really, really well. I don't know about the bit about how you have to put the farmer out to get the tea masters to move. That maybe is, that's disconnected from reality a little bit. But on the other hand, mechanically, that is great. I love the way that part of the game works. I love how, as you're putting those farmers out, you're trying to time it so you can send your tea master, or just make sure that you are getting your tea master in the right factory so when the other players put someone in the field, you get to move. I love that bit of interaction and the way that works. Just a little interaction, but it's very, very satisfying when suddenly you're able to race down that track. At the same time, I love that if you have done what you need to do in the factory, you can just boop, skip to the end. Great. Absolutely love the way that works. I like that there are different starting powers that everybody has, and they all seem pretty powerful. The last game I played with my wife, she had one where she got to have 8 cubes or 8 tea batches in her basket, and that gave her so many more options. Well, every time I did a harvest, I could grab one more tea cube from another space anywhere on the farm. But of course, I couldn't keep as much of it. So it was all kind of balanced out. And I really like how that works. I've already mentioned I like the little bits of history in there. I like that there's enough of those cards to where you're always going to have slightly different things happening with these end of round year events that are going to happen. I like the way that the contracts, the way they come out, they're somewhat randomized, but you have an idea what they're going to be. You can see what's coming next, and there are ways to kind of jump the queue and kind of pull out of the middle of that. I think all of that works really well. So, what are my quibbles with the game? I think my biggest quibble with the game is this is one of those games where it is just hard to do things. And what I mean by that is it is a challenge to make the thing that you're trying to sell to fulfill the contracts. There's a lot of steps. You have to get the tea, and you can't get the raw tea necessarily that you want, so you kind of get what you can. Then you have to go into the factory, which is going to kind of move it over. Then you got to wait till somebody goes in the same column, so you start moving your tea master down the way to dry the tea, and of course it's probably not going to be dry enough, so you got to move more, and you got to get little bonuses you're putting in there, and it's a challenge to do all the things. And I don't necessarily say that as a bad thing, but in some ways it reminds me of a game like Feudum. Now, to be clear, this is not a hard game to play. This is not a Feudum weight game at all. But I bring it up because in Feudum, it is intensely hard to do everything. You just need one food, but you got to do this and this and this and this and this and this and this, but you can't do this because if you haven't done this other thing, it's a lot of things you have to do. This is kind of like that to a lesser extent. It can be very hard to do the thing you want to do. because you sometimes have to do 3 things to do that one thing, which when you can do it is very satisfying. But when you can't and you suddenly get to the end of the factory track and you've done all of these things and you still have 2 wetness left in your tea batch, you just did all this effort for a bunch of crap tea. And that can be a bad feeling. And it's actually one of the things that my wife ran into, which actually turned her off a bit to the game, because she did all this work and it was all for naught. And so it's very satisfying when you accomplish it, but it can be very challenging with all the steps you have to take to do the thing that you want to do. And then the only other thing that I have to point out is my prototype arrived directly from China. They sent it straight from the factory, and they sent me the wrong version. They sent me a German version. And so there are changes that have been made to the game since the edition that exists out in the world. And I know that because they took the board and they had bits of paper pasted over the board with different actions. And some of those actions, I don't know what they do, because I had a German rulebook and I was able to go to BGG and download the English rulebook, but that's from the old stuff. So I can't talk to you about the minor changes and how they play, because I don't know and I could not figure out what they actually did. So as you're looking at this game, look at the campaign and just see what those changes are, because again, as I said, I don't know what they are. And then the only other thing that I will say is I think this game screams for a solo mode of some sort. It doesn't have one, but this is the type of game that would be very satisfying to have a solo play version. And I don't mean just a, do this thing, see what your score is. I mean, well, it's some kind of little bot that's going to move around, it's going to block spots, it's going to activate the tea factories. I think it would just be such a great experience if you had that, because it's a relatively small box game, and I think this is the type of game that the solo Euro player would really like, but there currently isn't one, so that's a bit of a bummer. So, there you have it, folks. As always, if I made any mistakes in the rules overview, please let me know in the comments with the timestamp so I can get that in the Klingon subtitles. If you found this video useful, please like, subscribe, share, maybe become a channel member. As always, thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.